Okay, this is Cassie and Derek's Veteran Project, and it's taking place on March 20th, 2008 at Christ United Methodist Church. And the person we are interviewing is Jim McIsaac, and Jim McIsaac? Okay.
Yep.
And he was born on November 27th, 1973, and he served in the Iraq conflict as part of the U.S. Air Force. And his rank was Tech Sergeant, and he served at Balad Air Force, Iraq. Do you care if there's like that?
What?
It wasn't quite smooth.
It doesn't matter.
Okay.
I think it'll be good. If not, we can go back over it.
Okay. I guess we'll start off with section 1.
All right.
Okay. So, Mr. McIsaac, were you drafted or did you enlist?
I enlisted.
You enlisted.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. How did your family feel about you leaving for the Iraq War?
They were very supportive of me because they know how I feel about just being in the military and serving my country. So, although it was very hard for them, they were very supportive of me doing it.
Is there anybody in your family before you that was in the military?
Mm-hmm. My dad was in the Air Force.
Did this contribute to you enlisting?
Oh yeah, I'm sure it did. Yeah. If my parents are divorced, and when I told my mom that I was joining the Air Force, the first thing she said is, "Did your father put you up to this?" But no, it was my decision. He did have an influence on me, because I was exposed to the Air Force through him.
Okay. What were some other reasons that you joined?
Main reason is to serve my country. It's always something I'd seen my father do, and it appealed to me. I didn't go straight out of high school. I went to college for a couple of years. That really wasn't a good fit for me at the time, and I needed to still have some direction in my life, so I joined the Air Force.
Is there a reason why you picked that particular branch of service? Is that because your dad?
Yeah, probably because of him. I actually looked at the Marines and decided they're a little too over the top. The Army is a lot more grunt work, and I did not want to be on a ship in the Navy, so Air Force seemed like a good fit.
Do you know the first date of service that...
I entered the Air Force on the 29th of February, 1996.
Go ahead.
Okay. Do you recall the first days of service and getting there and your emotions?
Oh yeah. I don't think I'll ever forget that. Because there's a process you have to go through before you get down to basic training. It's a MEPS station. It's basically where they in-process you and get all the paperwork started for you joining the Air Force. I was actually supposed to go in on the 28th of February, but they sent me to the wrong MEPS station. They sent me to Oklahoma City, and I was supposed to go to Kansas City. So it was a day later, and it was a leap year, so it was the 29th. It's a very long, drawn-out process of going through all the medical stuff and the paperwork, and then when you do finally get on the plane to go down to San Antonio, that's where the basic training's at for the Air Force. By the time I get down there, it's probably 1 or 2 in the morning, and they get all your paperwork processed there, and then they put you on a bus, and you go to meet your drill instructor. The Air Force called them TIs, training instructors, but it's the same thing as a drill instructor. And as soon as you get off the bus, it's in your face and yelling at you and pick up your bag, put your bag down. No, what are you doing? Don't put it down there. I didn't say to put it down there. And just stuff it messes with you, but it's for a reason. They're kind of they're breaking you down to mold you into the Air Force way. And by the time you finally do get to sleep, I probably slept for 2 hours, and they're coming in there and waking us up, and then you get there and you go to get your hair cut, you get your head shaved off. It's all pretty dramatic, but you kind of get used to it after a while.
So do you have any experience, or can you tell us about your boot camp and training experiences?
Yeah, basic training. It lasted 6 weeks. It's a lot of what they stress is attention to detail. It's teaching you to be in the military, how to march, how to stand at attention, how the customs and courtesies of saluting your superiors, your superior officers, and all that kind of stuff. And it's a lot of there's a lot of camaraderie that's built with the people that you go through that with, because there's physical training and there's weapons training. For a lot of people, it's the first time they've ever shot a weapon or done anything like that, and then the accumulation of that is going through the obstacle course and all that kind of good stuff, and going out to the range and shooting the rifle for the first time. And there's a few people that I went through basic training with that I've lost touch with all of them, but for the first probably like 5 or 6 years, I was in touch with a few of them, because you kind of build a bond there. Basic training 6 weeks, and then from there you go to your specialty training or your tech school, where you learn how to do your job. My tech school was there at Lackland Air Force Base in San Antonio, the same base as basic training, so that was another 10 weeks from there. So I was there for quite a while. And when I came into the Air Force, as a combat arms instructor. So basically my job was to teach people how to shoot weapons and fix and maintain weapons and that kind of stuff. And I actually, down at Lackland, there's a huge, for my job, that's where most of the people for my job would go, because a lot of them are needed to train basic trainees on how to shoot weapons and stuff. And in my flight for tech school, my group of people that had just come into the Air Force, out of the 10 people, one person got orders for Lackland, and that was me. And I was going to get stuck staying there with, having to teach basic trainees, and most of the basic trainees are nervous when they're handling weapons. Weird things happen, and I didn't want to stay there. I'd been there for basic training and tech school, and I didn't want to stay there. And there's actually a program you can swap. You have 3 days. You can swap assignments with other people in your flight. And one of the people in my flight who was married, his wife was pregnant and had family in San Antonio, and he actually swapped me. He had orders to Scott Air Force Base, and I had orders to Lackland, so we swapped, and that's how I ended up here.
Wow. So, do you have like a most memorable experience of boot camp, or something that really just like stuck out or was like harsh? Or
most memorable experience of boot camp? You know what? Honestly, my most memorable experience wasn't any of the stuff the drill instructors put you through or anything like that. My most memorable experience is the last week of basic training, leading up to your basic training graduation. You wear your blues, and there's kind of a sense of accomplishment. But the Sunday that you're kind of let loose and let free to do things, I forget that they called it a certain term. I can't remember what it was, but at the chapel service, where you get treated differently, you get treated special. It's kind of hard to explain, but they kind of recognize you because you're in your final week, and it was a really good feeling, because it's a lot of stuff that you go through, and just that feeling of being done with it was pretty cool.
Okay, I guess we're going to move on to segment 2. Do you want to? Okay. Which war did you serve in, just for the record?
Operation Iraqi Freedom, the Iraqi conflict.
Okay. And
so, September 11th, when that kind of all came out, what was kind of running through your head? Did you think that you were going to be? Yeah,
I actually, before September 11th happened, I was supposed to go to Incirlik Air Base in Turkey. It was only supposed to be for a couple of weeks, but then when September 11th happened, we all kind of knew that we'd be going somewhere. We didn't know where, but initial reaction was, we're fighting this at home, and that was weird because we'd always been trained to, if we ever had to fight a war, it was going to be somewhere else. So actually seeing it on American soil, that was, I don't think we were really prepared for that. And so my initial reaction was just, I was at the base. I didn't even go home the first few nights, because and security forces, the base police. I mean, that's what we do, is we guard the base. But then after things kind of settled down a little bit, I was supposed to go to Turkey anyway, so they sent our unit there for a couple of months. And that Turkey is, part of Turkey borders Iraq. And so it was a little bit close to it, but we weren't actually in a high-threat area. But what the purpose of the base there is, it enforced the no-fly zone. So we were there guarding that base and protecting the planes that would fly over Iraq. So that was, right after September 11th. I know we hadn't invaded Iraq yet, but everybody kind of knew, that's where the real thing is going to happen eventually. So.
Whenever you arrived at Balad Airport, do you remember?
Yeah.
Airbase,
Mm-hmm.
Balad Air Base. When you arrived there, do you remember what it was like? Just the general area?
Yeah, it was a long trip. Before I got to Balad, I was in Qatar for 3 days, waiting to get on the flight to go into Balad. When we finally did get to Balad, it's a different environment. It's not. Different parts of Iraq have different terrain. It's not just flat, barren desert like you kind of think of a desert environment.
Mm-hmm.
It is flat. It's really kind of rocky. I mean, you'd see palm trees. The base itself is pretty built up, but you could drive around the perimeter of the base, and you could see there's actually farmers' fields around the base. I mean, they'd be growing crops, and I was surprised to actually see green fields. I'm thinking I'm going to the desert, but then that's just on one side of it. On the other side, you could see more of like a desert atmosphere. It's rocky, but there's still some vegetation.
Okay. Whenever you got there, did you see any combat at first, or did you ever see combat?
No. Being on base. Okay, this is kind of the unit that I belong to. Most people in the Air Force, when they deploy to a base, they don't ever leave the base. But the unit I was assigned to, I was at a headquarters unit for the 732nd Security Forces Squadron, and our squadron's function was basically doing the Army job. We were ILO troops in lieu of forces, because basically the Army right now doesn't have enough bodies to do their job. So we were doing their job for them. We worked directly with the Army and for the Army. So being that I was on the headquarters unit for that, I traveled really all over different parts of Iraq. I've never been directly shot at, and I never directly shot at anybody. When I was on the base at Balad, we would get mortar and rocket attacks on a pretty frequent basis. I mean, for it to happen 2 or 3 times a day wasn't uncommon. Sometimes they were closer than others, but that's the extent of the being shot at that I saw.
So was there a process that you had to go through, like when you found out, or like did you know ahead of time that these were going to be coming?
No. Basically, when there's a mortar or a rocket attack, it's while it's happening, and if they catch it far enough in advance, the sirens go off, and there's a process you have to go through. If you hear the sirens, there's different sirens for how close it is. If you heard the one siren, it meant get on the ground, take cover right away because it's coming in right now. Otherwise, there's another siren where if they catch it soon enough, you can run to a bunker. So depending on the type of siren you heard is how close it was. If it meant you had to duck down and take cover, or if you had time to run to a shelter.
Okay.
So what went through your head whenever you heard those sirens for the first time?
The first couple times it is a little nerve-wracking. First thought is just hit the ground. You don't really think about anything else. But then while you're laying there on the ground, you do have time to think about things. How close is this? Thoughts like I'm going to die or anything like that. That never really went through my head. really just just being uneasy about what the outcome of this is going to be. Is it going to hit one of the buildings where we have people? Is it going to hit in the housing area where there's a ton of people? Just a sense of uneasiness, not so much fear, but just uneasiness. And after a while, you kind of grew used to it, and it's bad, but you get used to it, and it doesn't really affect you as much.
So did anyone ever get hit, or did any structures get hit around your base with these mortar attacks?
Yeah, it happened pretty frequently. That we actually, the second night that I was there, we had one that landed inside somebody's trailer where we stayed at. We called them shoes. It didn't detonate when the guy lived. It was really amazing. But Balad Air Base is really, really large, so a lot of times it would land on the other side of the base. When I was on Balad, I didn't really worry about it too much, but there were other times whenever we'd go to different places, we'd travel by helicopter, and it'd always be at night because it's safer. But even then, you'd be flying in the helicopter, and it's in the middle of the night, and you're tired, and you're kind of lulled into a sense of safety because you're in this helicopter. But then, if you're flying in a helicopter and you're sitting there and you're lulled into a sense of complacency, there's nothing you can do. But then it's kind of eye-opening when the helicopter starts, going back and forth and shooting its flares out because somebody's shooting at it. That happened one time, and I don't even know if they were directly shooting at us or if they were, they just saw a helicopter. And it basically was small arms fire, guns from the ground, and they're not going to really do a whole lot of damage to a helicopter, but it still wakes you up a little bit.
So were there any casualties, like in the group that you worked with or anything?
Yeah. Like I said, I was at the headquarters element, but our detachments that worked throughout Iraq, they did the police training the Iraqi police. We had base defense units that trained the Iraqi army. And so these are guys that are rolling in convoys in downtown Baghdad and Tikrit, Iraq, every day. And I went on a couple of convoys with them. Nothing ever happened while I was out. But we had two people, Staff Sergeant John Self and Senior Airman Jason Nathan, that both their Humvees got hit with IEDs, and they died as a result of those. That was actually when that first happened. That was actually an eye opener. And we had one other guy that his Humvee was hit by an IED and improvised explosive device, and everybody in that Humvee lived, but they were hurt pretty bad. The one guy they sent to the hospital at Balad. There's a major hospital there where they do amazing things. He had a piece of shrapnel that was lodged in his head, and they brought him in by helicopter. We went there. We took him from the helicopter into the hospital, and the doctors there were just amazing. They did things, and basically the doctors there are in these tents that are all connected together. There's actually a better hospital there now, but at the time the hospital was just this maze of tents, and they operated on him right there. They actually took part of his. They left the top of his skull off, and this is a little gross, I'm sorry, but they took the top of his skull because his brain was swelling. There wasn't room for his brain inside, so they took the top of his skull and they surgically implanted it inside next to his guts, basically to keep it warm, keep the tissue alive. And they did that. We didn't get to see the actual operation, but while we're standing there, they're doing that. And that's amazing. But we had two people die while I was there, both from IEDs. One I didn't know because I didn't work with him on a daily basis, but the other one, Airman Nathan, that was at Tikrit, Iraq. I knew him because when his unit got there, I went up there and I did their training on the machine guns, got to know them a little bit, and then a couple weeks later, we got the news, and that was kind of a wake-up call, and they, after they did what they needed to do at Tikrit, they shipped his body down to Balad, where we were at, and we did the Patriot detail, and put his casket on the with the flag draped casket. We put it on the plane to send home, and that was really kind of an eye opener.
So what was your most memorable experience of your entire time in Iraq?
My most memorable experience. There were a lot. I'd have to say it was a toss-up of being on the Patriot detail and putting Airman Nathan's casket on the plane. That was that was an honor because he gave his life for our country. It was a toss-up between that and a happy time at one of our bases in Numanaya, Iraq. It's not our base. It's an Iraqi army base where we have people training their Iraqi forces there. I got to interact with the Iraqi army there. We met with a Iraqi colonel and his major, and we got to spend some time with the Iraqi army troops. The interpreters that worked for our people there, they sat down and made us a meal, and got to see a little bit more of not just how it's presented to by the media or even us in the military, but just got to see kind of how they lived a little bit more, and that was really memorable. I just thought of another one. We have a police force in the Green Zone in the IZ in Iraq, and we went there, and just the U.S. embassy there is in Saddam's old palace, and that his palace is amazing. It's all marble. It's very, very nice, very chic, and it was amazing to see. And at the same time, it kind of gave me a little insight of how things worked there before the U.S. got there. I mean, because there's so much poverty in Iraq, and they just live in shambles, and they live in a war zone where you can't even walk down, if you're a Sunni, you can't walk down this street. If you're a Shiite, you can't go into this neighborhood. And just in shambles, buildings blown up from so much fighting. But then Saddam lived in this marble palace that had green, lush grass and fountains, and that was really kind of an eye-opener, too.
So you talked about how you helped train the Iraqi soldiers. Were they accepting of you then, as Americans?
Yes and no. They are in the fact that they realize they need help. They really couldn't have done it on their own. They need the training. But there's a lot of corruption too, and it's hard to tell. When you're in front of them and in their face, they might say one thing, but then when you leave, it's kind of they do whatever they were going to do anyway. Even in the Iraqi army, there's a lot of corruption. There's a lot of people that because the Iraqi army, they're just taking bodies. They want they want people to be in the army. It's not always the best people that they're getting. There's lots of cases of people who were in the Iraqi army or the Iraqi police force that were helping terrorist groups. So it's kind of hard to know who to trust.
Do you want to talk about the media? His views. Do you think that the media and the TV that Americans saw back at home, do you think that adequately tells about what was actually going on there? Do you think they portray it in a good fashion, or?
No, it's very sanitized, and this is just my own personal opinion, but I think the media has kind of a liberal bias to it. They don't show a lot of the good things that the U.S. forces are doing over there. They like to sensationalize things a lot. So I don't think I don't think it's accurate. I think it can be kind of one-sided.
Okay. Geography. Okay, you can ask that.
Have you been awarded any medals or citations or anything?
Nothing spectacular. I got an accommodation medal, just for the work that I did there. I got the Iraqi campaign medal. But again, I was on a headquarters element. I wasn't out there on the front lines every day. But some of the guys in our unit, who, we had people getting injured. They'd get, Purple Hearts, or we had people doing really good things. We'd see people getting Bronze Stars. But as far as myself, no, I got an accommodation medal, the Iraqi campaign medal, and then there's another medal that you get anytime you serve overseas.
So how did you get those? The first ones that you?
Well, the first two is the Expeditionary service medal. That's just for going overseas and deploying overseas. The Iraqi campaign medal is just everybody who serves in Iraq gets that. And the accommodation medal is basically there's 3 different levels of medals that they would give people for the work that you did there. An achievement medal, an accommodation medal, or a Bronze Star. Bronze Star, you really got to have done something outstanding. Achievement medal means you did some really good things, and accommodation medal means you went above and beyond, but nothing as like in the lines of heroic or anything like that.
Do you know anyone who did get a Purple Heart, and who are some of those people?
Lots of people that mostly it was the people that were in our unit that were stationed down in Baghdad and Tikrit that were rolling outside of the wire or off base every day. If like the people whose Humvees would get hit with an IED, a couple people who got hit with small arms fire. I actually know one person she's stationed at Scott now, who got a Purple Heart because she was laying in her trailer on her bed and a stray round came in through her roof and hit her in the shoulder. So it doesn't matter if you're engaged in battle. If you're in a war zone and you get injured or shot at, then you get a Purple Heart.
Okay. Now we're going to move on to the geography of the place you were at.
Okay.
What were some of the locations? Like you said that you went around the place a lot. What were some of those locations that you were at?
Okay. I was stationed at Balad, which is Baghdad is really the center of Iraq. Balad is about 60 miles northwest of there. I also went to Tikrit, Iraq, which is Saddam Hussein's hometown, and that's about 110 miles north of Baghdad. I went to Baghdad itself. I went to Habanaya, Camp Habanaya, which is an Iraqi army base. It's between Fallujah and Baghdad. Fallujah is about, I think it's 80 miles west of Baghdad, and Camp Habanaya is in between there in Baghdad. I also went to Numaniyah. It's another Iraqi army base, which is in the very southern part of Iraq. So it really kind of would make a big circle.
What was the differences between all these different places? Like, was it? You mentioned how like everything wasn't just desert. Like, what were the differences in?
In Habanaya. Was more what you would think of as like a desert terrain, because there just wasn't a big urban area around it. Tikrit is actually pretty flat and open. Well, Camp Spiker is the name of the base that's by Tikrit, where Saddam's hometown is. Camp Spiker is actually pretty flat and pretty open, but then Tikrit is a fairly large city that's right next to it. And then Numaniyah in the southern part of Iraq is pretty open, pretty flat, more sandy. But it was kind of interesting when we flying from Balad to Numaniyah, the helicopters that you didn't go straight there. You made lots of stops, but you would fly over a lot of in between Baghdad and Numaniyah. Numaniyah is big, empty, kind of sandy, but in between there you'd see a lot of, again, farmers' fields, crops growing and that kind of thing. And then Baghdad itself is just this huge city of different neighborhoods and walls, and it's really, really big.
So did the geography play a role? Like, do you like in the fighting, like in the area where you were?
Really, just in the cities. It's mostly an urban war. The fighting isn't out in the open. It's because we're not fighting. We're not fighting an army. We're fighting small groups of insurgents and terrorists, and it's mostly in an urban setting. Or if it is out in the open, it's them planting IEDs on routes that, if they know the route that that we would take, then they might plant an IED on a road. So you always, when you're on the ground, you always have to be vigilant and looking for different things that might be set up. At Camp Spiker in Tikrit, where I went to go do the weapons training for them up there, we went off base to go to the range, and the range really it wasn't like a regular weapon range. It was just a big vast area of land that they had blocked off, but it didn't belong. It was public land. So that was really weird because they chose that area just because there's nothing out there that you could hit if you're firing weapons. Helicopters would use it, and when we went out there was a sheep herder and his sheep that were walking across, and we had to go shoo him off before we could start shooting so that we wouldn't kill him or his sheep.
So did you guys get training in, because obviously this is probably a different situation, like urban-wise, than you usually are in. So did you guys get training to fight in an urban landscape? Yeah,
we do train on urban warfare, but not to the extent for what we were doing. So before all of our people that are working for the Army that are in towns, they did 30 days of training with the Army at an Army base stateside to get them ready to do that kind of thing.
So you talked about you saw the city, and did you have any contact with the people in the cities?
Mostly that was in the green zone in Baghdad, where we had a police force there. And there's inside the green zone there. It's also known as the international zone, and it's called that because there's so many people from so many different countries there. But also, it's before we were ever there, there's neighborhoods, there's apartments, there's houses. One of the neighborhoods that we went into, and actually, there's checkpoints all around the green zone that you have to go through to get into it if you don't already live there. But everybody inside the green zone is supposed to have an ID on them that says they're supposed to be there. And part of what our guys did there was making sure the people that are there are supposed to be there. So one of the neighborhoods we went into was actually pretty bad. It had been bombed heavily before. These shacks and houses that were already in bad shapes were just literally blown apart, and people are living in really bad conditions. And we'd stop and we stopped to check this one guy out. He had an ID, but his ID was wrong. It said, by his birth date on the ID, it said he would have been probably 19 or 20 years old, and the guy was obviously older. He was in his 40s. But we checked him out, and everything checked out. They just made a mistake on his birth date. But while we're there, these little kids were coming up, and we had a cooler with, we were handing out just water and little snacks and stuff, and it was, you would have thought it was Christmas, because they were. This one little girl came out. I'll never forget it. She wasn't wearing any shoes, and her brother, he had one set of clothes, and that was pretty. And there's nothing really you can do to help them other than what we're doing is just passing out water. and trying to, show that, even though we're here and we're in their country, we're trying to be ambassadors as well.
So whenever there was like a lot of fighting in an area, did you notice that like people like moved, or did they have anywhere to go?
They didn't have anywhere to go. It's basically if fighting breaks out in their neighborhood, or if they're in their house, they just kind of bunker down and hope that it passes.
So while you were out in Iraq, how did you keep in contact with your family?
Oh, that actually wasn't. It was pretty. Technology's come a long way. When I was on Balad at my desk, I had internet access. I'd email daily or regularly, phone calls. I called home probably every other day. It was actually not hard to stay in contact, and I actually. I took my cell phone with me because my cell phone has iTunes software, so I use it to listen to music too. And it's one of those quad band phones that gets service everywhere. So I would actually text message when I was at different places. I had service everywhere I went except where I was stationed at Balad. So whenever I had to leave and go on these trips, it was a little more dangerous than being on Balad. So when I got back to the base and I was safe, I'd text and say, "Hey, I'm back. Everything's good." So it was actually pretty neat. Before I even got to Balad, when I was at Qatar, I got my phone. No, this was on the way home. I'm sorry. I texted a few people, and one of them was Steve Berger, and he didn't know somebody was texting him, and he didn't recognize the number, so he just tried to call it back, and my phone rang, and I don't know why. I knew it was going to cost me money, but I just answered it, and I said, "Hey, what's going on?" He's like, "Jim," and I said, "Yeah, I'm in Kuwait." He goes, "Are you serious?" So yeah, I said, "Yeah, I'm going to hang up now because this is probably going to cost me a lot of money." But yeah, so technology has made it a lot easier to stay in touch. And they had internet cafes there, just rooms where they had internet set up where airmen and soldiers, so you can go and if you could do with the internet cameras, you can do instant messaging. So they make it actually pretty easy to stay in contact.
This is a little off topic, but do you feel like you have a greater appreciation for, or a greater understanding of our like instant message society today with this new generation of kids? Do you think you understand it more?
Yeah. Oh, and I think it's awesome. I mean, even in 2001 when I went to Turkey, I mean that was 6 years before I went to Iraq. Even back then, I mean, there wasn't as much communication. You could get on. I mean, obviously there was internet and email, but not everybody had access to it. You had to go and you'd have to wait, or you'd have to wait to make a phone call. But yeah, so I think it's awesome.
Okay.
So what was the food like when you were there?
Oh, it was not good. On Balad, like I said, Balad is fairly large, so there were 4 different dining facilities that you could eat at. Probably the worst one on Balad was across the street from where we worked at, so that's the one we ate at a lot. It wasn't too bad, but after a while, it's kind of the same thing, and it gets old. And, you could tell when the supply trucks, when their convoys were getting attacked more often because we wouldn't get as many supplies, and you could tell because there wouldn't be very much. There wouldn't be a good selection, or it'd be the same stuff every day at the dining facility. But also in our new and improved Air Force or military, or however you want to look at it, corporate world, on Balad there was a Burger King, a Taco Bell, a Pizza Hut, and a Subway, and a Popeyes.
Wow.
Yeah, none of it tasted like it did back here, but you could order it and try to imagine. But actually, yeah, the best, and that it wasn't always that way. Sometimes you'd get they'd have steak and seafood night. the lobster wasn't any good, and the steak was like, most of the time it was like rubber. But every once in a while you get a good one, and so it wasn't too bad. But the best meal I had was what I was talking about earlier, when the interpreters for our guys, when I was in Numanaya, when they cooked us a meal, they went out and they always tell us you're not supposed to eat from local food, but these guys, they lived and worked next to our guys every day, and kind of trusted their lives with them. So we trusted them. So they made us lamb kebabs, and they made us this bread that was just to die for. So like the local meal that I ate was probably the best that I ate the whole time I was there.
So were there any like supplies or anything that was really highly valued among the soldiers?
Mostly just creature comforts. The supply chain as far as gear and equipment was really good. And that was actually, I worked in a logistics section. Part of my job was ordering things. And in Iraq, it's actually easier to get equipment and supplies. And I'm not talking big things like body armor or vehicles or that type of thing, but just day-to-day stuff, because we don't really have too much of a budget you have to fall under, so getting day-to-day stuff wasn't too hard.
So what was the morale and like the atmosphere kind of among the soldiers? Did you get to?
The Army people that I worked for and worked with, most of their morale was pretty good, but the Army is really getting the short end of the straw in Iraq. They're staying there, as it is right now, they're staying there for a year to 15 months. But as far as the Air Force, the people that I worked with on a day-to-day, the morale's high. Even when we were off duty, which wasn't that often, but when we were off duty, we would hang out. We would, we did things like we played sand volleyball. We made a little sand volleyball court, and so the morale is from what I saw was fairly good.
Like you're talking about sand volleyball, what were some other things that you guys did for fun in your free time?
Well, actually, on Balad, as far as morale and welfare stuff, there's quite a few things to do. There's a movie theater on Balad. We'd check that out every once in a while. We'd go to the gym. When we were hanging out, we'd play cards, or a lot of people like to do like the PlayStation games and that kind of thing.
Never mind.
Did you guys ever have like bands come to your place or anything?
There were a couple. While I was there, we didn't get a whole lot in the way of the USO type tours. We had one comedian come, and actually Gary Sinise and his band came, and that was about it. Right before I got there, the New England Patriot cheerleaders came, and then there were a couple of concerts after I left. But while I was there, there wasn't a whole lot of that.
Do you recall any humorous or unusual events out of the ordinary?
Yeah. Well, actually, yeah. It's humorous, but it's because of a bad situation. When Airman Nathan, that I was talking about before, when we found out his IED, or his Humvee got hit with an IED, and that he had died, our commander and our first sergeant, the first thing they need to do is get up there to be with the troops. And so as soon as we found out, they loaded up, they put all their gear on. They got on a flight. It was a C-17 aircraft, big cargo plane. There's civilian contractors out all over the place that work there, and the civilian contractors were in charge of the transit between the terminal, actually kind of basically the plane terminal, and taking people out to the plane. Well, they had they took the commander and the first sergeant out there, and they were taking them out to the C-17, and the crew said they're not manifested on the plane. And they're like, no, they're supposed to be on this one. And so the crew said, all right, get on. And so they got on and they took off, and the flight from Balad to Spiker, where they were supposed to go, it's only 60 miles, so it doesn't take that long to fly there. And one of the crew came by and told them, if you guys want to take off your vest and your gear and everything, put your weapons down, you can just stretch out. Like, no. They said, no, we're okay. And then after a little while, they came by and they said again, really, if you want to go lay down somewhere, it's going to be a long flight. Then they're like, wait a minute, where are we going? And he said, Mildenhall in England. They put them on the wrong plane, and they sent them to England. And so they got stuck in Mildenhall, England for 3 days, and they couldn't. They had to stay there. They couldn't get back, and it was funny. We gave them a lot of grief over that. That's probably the funniest thing that happened while I was there. I mean, there's other little things. I'm sure I'll probably think of a million of them after I leave, but yeah.
So did you keep any type of personal diary or anything just to record down the events of the day? Or?
I didn't. I would email my wife and other people back home, and just on big significant events, and I've saved all those emails, so that's kind of how I've recorded it. But I didn't really keep a journal that I wrote in every day.
Okay.
Okay, you can ask that.
So are there any stories or experiences from the war that you really haven't shared with anyone?
You don't have to share them, obviously, if you...
I don't know. The one thing I probably haven't told any... I don't know if I... there's a couple things that I just haven't told a lot of people. I probably did tell Gina, and I would tell her things after I was home. I wouldn't tell her while I was over there because I didn't want her to worry so much. The one thing I don't think I actually told anybody is when Airman Nathan, that I was talking about before, when he got killed, his day-to-day, they were in our squadron, but they worked for the Army, doing the Army's job. And when he died, the sergeant major from the Army unit that they were working with came down, and we went we're at the morgue. They were doing what they need to do there, and then there was a big to-do about they were going to present him with his Purple Heart, but our leadership on the Air Force side had said, no, you're not going to do that. That's for us to do. And the sergeant major, who is in the Army, a sergeant major is the top enlisted guy. It's the top enlisted rank you can get in the Army. After they were done, he said, I don't care what anybody says. I'm going to go and put that warrior's Purple Heart on his chest. Does anybody want to come in there with me? And so me and a couple other guys went in there, and his body was covered in a flag, but they peeled the flag back, and he put the Purple Heart on his chest, and we were fighting hard to keep composed at that moment. That was pretty intense. Other than that, I'm trying to think if there's anything I haven't really shared. I don't know how big of a deal this is, but one thing I probably never tell anybody else either is that the trip that I made down to Numanaya, it was by helicopter, but the helicopters didn't go there very often. So in order to, if I wanted to fly back on a helicopter, I was going to have to stay there a week and a half, and I couldn't really do that. So I arranged with an Army unit to take a ground convoy from that base back up to another base where I could get a helicopter ride. And it was a 5-hour ground convoy, and we started in the southern part of Iraq and traveled up to Baghdad and then past Baghdad to another base to get a ride back to the base I was at. And the Army unit that I was with, and that route that they travel, they get into a firefight almost every time that they travel that route. And I knew that when I scheduled it. But it was just something I needed to do. And while we're on that route, that convoy, nothing happened. It was was amazing. I don't know if it was a lot of prayer or what, but nothing happened. But I don't think I ever told anybody that I knew ahead of time that those guys often got into a firefight, and I know I didn't tell Gina that because she'd be mad at me for purposely putting myself at risk, but it worked out.
I've got a pretty good follow-up question. Do you have anything?
No, go
Okay.
ahead.
Like you said, did you pray a lot during your time at Iraq, and do you think your faith changed as a result of that?
I don't think my faith changed. I did pray a lot, and Sunday was the one day off that we had. And I mean, I say day off. We would always end up at the office because something had to be done. But I would actually go to church. We had a big church service and a tent there. It was just, and honestly, the first week that I got there, it was just kind of a reassurance of my faith because I got there on a Saturday, and like I said, I'd been up for I don't know how many hours, and so they kind of told us, go get some rest, get caught up on your sleep, and then we'll put you in your slot, and you'll press from there. And so I did that. I got some rest, and the next day was a Sunday. And I got up, and Balad is, like I said, it's very large, and I didn't know where I was going or what, but I was walking around, and I saw this building, and I saw what I thought was the BX, the shopping place, and I go up to the building, and I'd already been walking. I walked for probably about a mile and a half, and I go up to the building, and I hear music coming from it, and so I walk up. And it's a church service, and I'm like, awesome. And I went in, and they're singing and everything. And then it was actually an Army chaplain that was running the service. And when the Army chaplain got up there before he gave his little message, he said, "God is good." And everybody responded, "All the time." And then he said, "All the time," and everybody said, "God is good." And that's something that Reverend Shane does at our church here, and I almost started crying. I was like, "Oh man," and it was just kind of like I really felt like it was God kind of like reassuring me that hey, you're going to be okay. So that was really actually pretty cool.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. So you went over there in 2007. When did you exactly go over?
I got there on the 28th of February, 2007, and I left on the 3rd of July.
What did you do in the days and the weeks afterwards once you got home? How did that kind of go?
I spent a lot of time with the kids.
Yeah.
I actually had right about a month off before I had to go back to work. You get 2 weeks of reconstitution time, and then you can take a couple more weeks of leave on top of that. Coming home, it was awesome. It was a little weird because I was coming home to a new house. So we were looking to buy a house before I left, but then the house that we had looked at before had gone on the market, and so we put our house on the market, and that actually fell through. But then Gina wanted to keep looking. She had power of attorney, so she could sign everything for me, and so she found a house and she bought it. And so I came home to a new house, and she'd only moved in a couple weeks before I got home. So things were a little crazy. It took some adjusting. We spent a few days at home, and then my dad and my stepmom came up from Georgia. And they watched the kids, and Gina and I went just off on our own for about 3 or 4 days. We went over to Herman, Missouri, and just kind of connected again. It was an adjustment the first week or two, just getting used to. I mean, I missed my kids terribly, but it was also an adjustment getting used to being more responsible for more than just me. That took some getting used to. And then we had kind of a welcome home party. We had friends and family over and stuff, and then spent a lot of time just doing stuff around the house and being with Gina and the girls.
Was it a big adjustment for your schedule as far as going from your your work schedule in Iraq to a more leisurely schedule? Was that an adjustment?
It was, but it was a welcome adjustment. What really messed me up at first was just my sleep cycle because of the time change. It took some getting used to. But yeah, I was ready for some downtime. I was ready to just relax.
So have you continued any of the friendships that you made over there? Still have relationships with people?
Oh yeah. There's two other people that are in my unit here that I went over there with, and we've obviously grown a little bit closer. But then the people that I worked for and worked with there, yeah, I still keep in contact with them, mostly through email.
Did you go on to get any more of an education that was paid for by the U.S. government, or? I'm going to a school now, Grantham University. It's all correspondence stuff. I was actually taking classes while I was in Iraq, and I've kept taking classes since I've gotten back. So, are they supported by the U.S. Army, like bill-wise?
Oh yeah, active duty. You get. There's the GI Bill, which is really for when you're out of the military. But while you're serving, you get tuition assistance. It's $4,500 a year. That is basically free money for school.
So after you got out of Iraq, did you join a veterans organization or?
No. There's there's people that do the VFW and that kind of thing, but a lot of people that do that are kind of more towards older, kind of retired type people.
Do you plan on ever joining a veterans organization?
I don't know. I think I probably would. I wouldn't be against it. Just so it's the people that are in those groups. You kind of have a common bond of having served, and those people kind of know what it's like. So. And they do good things. We have people from the VFW that are always, like when we have troops coming home, they're always there, giving a meal or doing whatever. So they do really good things.
Do you think that you'll ever have to go back over to Iraq, or does that kind of depend on how?
I wouldn't doubt it, and because I am in the Guard but active duty. And the reason why I went from regular active duty to doing that is because it provides a more stable home life. I don't have to, because regular active duty people have to, move bases every 3-4 years. I don't have to do that, and I won't deploy as much. So, how long we're in Iraq for, I don't see us getting out of there anytime soon. So, as of right now, I don't see myself, I don't know that I'll be going back, but I wouldn't doubt it.
Compared to like the life at Balad Air Base and like the people there, do you think they were more like for the war than people are here? What's like the difference in opinion about war?
The Iraqi people, or
oh no, like the people in the U.S. Air Force and other organizations.
Well, for the people that have served over there and kind of can see, what it's like, I'm sure they're. I didn't meet a whole lot of people that in the military that weren't for the war. It's not exactly fun being over there. Excuse me, but most of the people that I ran into, that's why they're in the military for that purpose, is to serve our country, and most people are happy of it. I don't know if happy is the right word, but are glad that they're doing what they're doing.
So do you think like people back at home were as glad to be involved in the war as you were?
Probably not. And I've got friends and relatives, especially relatives that aren't necessarily for it, and they weren't happy about me being over there. And they're glad I was back, and I know people that are not for the war, but they're still supportive of people who are in the military and having to go over there and fight.
So, as your experiences over there, have they influenced how you think about war in general, or this war?
Not a whole lot. This war, what I do for a living is I serve my country, whether that's serving at stateside or serving in a war zone. That's my job, and I'm glad to do it. This current war, it's not, my personal feelings on it are that we need to have a plan to leave, to get out, and I don't really see that happening anytime soon. Because a lot of, and at different bases that I was at, I'd see where the British military was there, and when they pulled out, it was a lot of chaos. So, for us to be there and, want it to be set up as a democracy, it's not going to be like it is in the U.S. I think at some point we need to have a plan for handing over the reins.
Do you feel like people here really even understand this conflict or even war in general like you guys do?
No, I think unless you've kind of been there and seen it, you'll have a better understanding if you have than if you haven't.
Section 6.
Well, that kind of was part of Section 6.
Did we cover 3 of the questions?
No.
Do you want? What's your best memory of your entire service in military?
Not necessarily with the war, but
just anywhere.
Wow. That's a hard question.
It's pretty general.
Yeah. Well, honestly, my best memory in my military career would have to be in 2003. The Air Force has this competition every year it's called Defender Challenge, and it's basically a competition for the security police as far as tactics, shooting. There's an obstacle course, and I tried out for the National Guard team, and I made the team, and we went to the Air Force competition, and we were competing against other commands in the Air Force, and we were competing against the British military had a team there and that kind of thing, and we did like a 5-week training camp up at McCord Air Force Base in Washington, and then went to San Antonio for the competition, and I made some really good friends. One guy that our families are friends now. They live in Wisconsin, but we go and visit them. And but anyhow, our team did really good, and we got 3rd place overall. The Brits got 1st, and then the Department of Energy. These guys do nothing but train, and they guard nukes. They got 2nd, but we did really good, better than anybody kind of expected us to do, and that was just kind of a highlight of my career, probably one of my better memories.
And in contrast to that, what's like the worst memory of your experience?
The worst memory, man, I don't know. Probably was when right after September 11th, when I left to go to Turkey. Well, that whole time really was just a bad feeling. But when I left to go to Turkey, Gina and I were married in 1998, and so this was the first time I had to leave her for an extended period of time. And my oldest daughter was 5. My youngest daughter was 6 months old, at the time my youngest daughter, Chloe, she was 6 months old, and that was hard to leave them. That was probably the low point.
And do you think there's any rivalry between the Air Force and the Marines and the Army and all those different?
Absolutely, yeah. The Marines, they're a bunch of thick-necked jarheads. You have all that kind of stuff, and actually it was hard for us because working directly with the Army a lot, because while I was their tours are year long. In the Army, in this war, they're facing the brunt of the battle. They're doing all the dirty work, and the unit I was in, I got to see that a little bit more firsthand. And their tours were a year long, and then while I was there, they got announced that the Army was extending all their tours to 15 months, and the convoy that I went on from Anumanaya, the ground convoy, the Army unit that I got to ride with, they just found out they're staying there for 15 months, and they're ribbing on the two Air Force guys, like, oh, what, you guys aren't, you guys don't have a jet you can fly home in, and that kind of thing, and then they're giving us a hard time about being in the Air Force, and like, well, how long are you here for? And I still got to get a ride from these guys, so I didn't want to tell them, oh, I'm only here, 4 or 5 months. How long are you here for? But so we were just, oh, we've been here for a while. We got a little while to go, and and then they could just kind of kept ribbing us. And then after a while, I'm like, hey, you know what? There's a reason why I joined the Air Force. Nobody made you join the Army. But yeah, that's the life. Yeah. So yeah, there's definitely a little. Most of it's good natured though.
Is there anything else that we didn't cover that you'd like to add or anything?
Any stuff? It can be anything, really.
I don't think so. We covered a lot of stuff.
I kind of what I was thinking.
No other questions?
Yeah. For like the first, like, well, not the introduction, but like the first part. Like,
right.
Since this is a pretty recent war, do you want to like ask for like a setup of what was really happening, and like, because like I don't feel like everybody knows really what's going on or what led to us getting involved.
All right, kind of like a
setup.
Yeah.
Okay. I don't think that like everybody in the United States really understands the nature of this war and why we got involved in all those different things. Do you think you could give us like a setup of the events leading to our involvement and what was going on?
Well, there's of course September 11th is really kind of what kicked the whole thing off. And there's the whole thing about searching for weapons of mass destruction. There's debate that's up in the air, but the terrorist organizations that are behind that, the Al Qaeda is mostly in Afghanistan, but they are still in Iraq. The Sunni or the Shiite people that are helping the Al Qaeda there's still terrorist cells in Iraq that are there, and it's going to be a while before they're gone. It's hard just because of the dedication that these people have, and I know there's controversy about the whole Saddam thing, but in order to get rid of, and again this is just my view and my opinion, in order to get rid of the terrorists that are operating in Afghanistan and Iraq, Saddam had to go. He could not have been in power. So, with that combined with them searching for weapons of mass destruction, it's kind of how it led up to the war.
I'm not really, familiar with like the Sunni and Shiite. I just know that they like have conflicts a lot.
Yeah. And
was that part of the war at all? That conflict?
I mean, it still is to this day. I mean, that's all of the fighting in Iraq. It's basically because of the two groups they're not able to get along. So that's what most of the fighting is the result of.
Do you see the upcoming presidential election as changing anything as far as overseas?
I don't know if it will. Leading up to it, I don't know if it will or not. But I also think that the Iraqi people that are pro U.S. and that are glad about the U.S. being there. I don't think it matters so much. But people who are fighting the U.S., I think they might use that to their advantage, whether or not it's a Democrat or Republican, because apparently if they think if a Democrat gets in there, they're automatically going to pull all their troops out, and I really don't think that's even possible. Despite what it's not going to be quick like that. I think there's going to be U.S. presence there for a long time to come.
No, that's the Iraq elections that you're talking about.
No,
our
presidential election.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Well, when were the elections for the Iraqi democratic government?
I don't know offhand.
Oh, okay. I feel like I've learned a lot about this war.
So would you say that you have no regrets about entering service?
No. Well, I wouldn't say none. I mean, ideally, like if I'm telling this to my children, I think the best choice is I should have stayed in school and finished that, because now that I already have a life established, I'm having to go back and go through school now, and it's harder. So sometimes I wish I would have finished school first before I came in the military. I don't regret coming in the military. I just kind of regret, maybe the timeline that I did. But I really think, everything happens for a reason. If I didn't go in the military when I did, I wouldn't have been able to swap with that guy who had orders to Scott and I had orders to San Antonio. That's how I wound up here. I met my wife. We had a family. We've established a home and a life. So I don't really have any regrets. But sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I had stayed in school and finished that first.
You can't think of anything?
Well, we got a lot.
Yeah.
Okay, good.
Well, wait. Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm just coming up with these questions.
No problem.
As far as like uniforms and like the stuff you wear in combat goes, like what do the different forces wear, and like what are some things about the equipment?
Well, basically, when we're on the base on Balad, you didn't really have to worry about anything most of the time. You just had to be in your uniform. But there were different uniform postures. Like if they would get intelligence that there was a threat of an attack, then we would have to wear our body armor and helmet. But anytime we left the wire, if we're either in a vehicle or a helicopter, then you had to have your full body armor with the plates and the side protection and the front protection and your weapon. I had 2 weapons that I had to carry and all the ammunition and any type of gear that I'd have to have on there besides ammunition. I'd have, like, personally I carried a GPS, but then also, I had a knife and a seatbelt cutter that I had to carry. You had a first aid kit, and then, depending on how long I was going to be gone, I'd also have a backpack with, supplies in it and that kind of thing. And when I had to travel and I had to wear everything with the full, weapons and ammo and everything, it was probably an additional 60 pounds on me. Yeah, so it gets cumbersome and a little bit tiring after a while, but it's to protect you, so you can't complain too much.
So what's like the most amazing thing that you've seen like the military do, like technologically or just in general? What's like the most amazing, like something that you've just been awed with the military and what they can do?
Really, it's just the weapon systems that we have now, and I'm not the weapons that I train people on, guns or anything like that, but just and there's some stuff I can't talk about, but just the way the technology, like the one thing we have that we flew out of Balad all the time, were the unmanned drones. That there's a guy back at the base with basically a joystick controlling where this thing flies, and it has cameras. Some of them even have bombs on them, but mostly it's for reconnaissance. It has a camera, and it can go out and fly around and get intel on things, and if it gets shot down, nobody dies. So just the technology it's a lot of it's come a long way, even since when I first came in.
Okay.
This is kind of backtracking a little bit, but your father, served. Did he serve in any wars? I don't know if he served.
He was, he did 30 years. He started off enlisted, and then he went to school and he got his commission, and he was in finance. So he wasn't really. He went to during Vietnam. He went to Thailand, and the closest he ever came to anything. He worked in an office. He was the money guy. Paying people. So he wasn't really around that. The closest he ever got to it is one day he said that some guy was kind of crazy local guy was out in the street shooting a pistol into the air, not really at anybody or anything, and that was like a couple blocks away. And so he was actually more apprehensive than a lot of people about me going. One of the things he told me was, and I kind of fought him on this, was he goes, "Don't volunteer for anything, don't be a hero." And I'm like, I said, I'm not going to go out of my way to, be in harm's way, but if it's part of my job, then I can't, I have a duty to do. And he's like, "Well, just be smart." So, yeah, he eventually calmed down, but he worried about me a lot while I was over there.
Trying to think of how to word this question. I've read in books about World War II and like some of the fun things that soldiers did. Like they would sometimes take planes up in the air, like fly planes, and they would get like the planes high enough to where they could like put an ice cream bucket out of like the hangar or something.
Yeah.
And like it would freeze it or something, and it was called like the $25,000 treat, and they'd go and eat it because like it cost so much to take a plane up. But did you guys get to like play around with technology in any fun way like that?
No, it's a different era now. Things like that, it just really doesn't happen too much. Pilots, they're a whole other entity. They kind of. They do their thing, so there might be stuff that they do that I wouldn't get to see or do. So
we've got a lot of information.
Yeah.
Okay. Basically, what this says is that I'll just explain to you what we're doing. We're compiling information, and this is like a nationwide project. Mm-hmm. Lots of different schools are doing it, and we're compiling these histories of these war veterans so that. And we're going to put them in the National Archives, actually. Because, war veterans are dying every day, and we want to preserve these memories for years to come.
Mm-hmm.
So it's anywhere from World War I
to the present.
Okay, cool. Well, thanks for asking me, guys.
Well, thank you so much for doing it for us.
Yeah, no problem. This is really pretty cool, getting to find out all this stuff.
Okay. Yeah, and I'll email you. I'll go through and I'll look through my pictures, and I'll email you some that you might be able to use.
Okay. We will edit this and.